So, welcome to our next session, which is a case study of passenger flow and forecasting at Keflavik Airport. I'm delighted for this session to be joined by Thordis and Gundamar from Keflavik Airport in Iceland to take us through this next session. So, in this session, we're talking really about two very interrelated capabilities. The first one's passenger flow, so that's looking at passenger movement from really the curb through to the gate, and then forecasting, which is predicting the arrival and turn-up profiles for the passengers. So, talking about passenger flow first, can you give us a feel for what Keflavik Airport are doing with passenger flow? Which areas of the airport do you currently have data? Do you actually have coverage right the way from arrival at the airport on the curbside right the way through to the gate?
Yes. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to track the passengers throughout the terminal just to be able to understand the behavior of the passenger. So we start tracking at the curbside, hence the name curb to gate. And we end the tracking when the passenger leaves to his aircraft, so we can actually know on which flight the passenger went to. We are tracking the check-in area. We're tracking the security area, where we actually have a pretty, and that's where we started. We started with measuring waiting time in security. Then we're tracking the retail area and the border control into the country and out of the country, so immigration and emigration. We're not tracking in any details the commercial areas, but we want to understand when the passenger goes into the area and when he leaves the area, just for planning purposes.
Oh, okay, so maybe give us a feel for how do you use the data, and what are the key challenges that you're trying to address with this data?
I think, well, one of the key inputs and one of the initial reasons why we started the project was because we use, when we're going to construction project, we heavily rely on simulation. And it's so important to have accurate data when you're using a simulation model. And until we started gathering the actual data, we just had to rely on manual measurements and just some general feeling about the passenger flow. But with the accurate actual data, we know that we can we'll take a lot better informed decisions in construction projects especially. But we also use it for capacity analysis, understanding when we're out of capacity and on these different areas. So I think that would be the main input.
And so you're using the data both for forecasting purposes, which we'll get onto, and longer term planning, and also you're using them in real time as well within your operations?
I would say in real time that would relate to the forecasting part of it. But of course, we're constantly monitoring cues and trying to react on if we see any issues forming in the terminal. So we're definitely using them live as well.
So I'm always absolutely fascinated by the data that comes out of curb to gate, and I have to say I've looked at Keflavik's data. Whenever I do it, I lose an hour of my life, because every time I look, there's something else I find surprising, or variance between different airlines on the same route, or data that just I don't think it makes sense till I look at it, and then I realize that the human behavior isn't as I'd expect it to be. Perhaps you could share, are there particular cases of data insight that you found really interesting that before you had this data that you had no idea occurred? Or are there particular uses that you found to this data that you weren't expecting?
I think what was the most interesting for me to see was actually how the passenger flow through the terminal, and to understand that it isn't as streamlined as you would think. A passenger doesn't go through security, then goes to the retail area, and then goes towards his gate. Go from one place to the next, and then I end up at the gate, and that's it. But that's not the case for all passengers.
When we look at the data, you start realizing how some passengers are much more risk averse and they turn up at the last minute and must run through the airport, versus those that turn up and have a much more leisurely journey. I find it fascinating just looking at that variance in the data, and even between flights that are going to the same destination, the difference between the business class passengers and EasyJet passengers and British Airways passengers, etc. It's just fascinating insight that we've never had before, and I think I've spent my entire career working in aviation, and this is one of the first times that I've seen data that I've thought, I've never seen that before. The uses just seem to flow from the data.
Yeah, and I think there are so many different ways to find value in the data that we don't even know about. I mean, everyone is always talking about the value in data, and that is so, but finding the value is really difficult. But this is, there are, I think, endless possibilities of finding different ways to utilize the data. So we're not at our endpoint; we're just at the starting point.
Yeah, no, I can believe it. I mean, I think looking from a Veovo perspective as well, passenger flow data is opening up opportunities we can see in the wider product set for things like driving more dynamic feed screens about engaging with customers and their real behaviours within the airport, or within resource management and how we allocate bag belts within the resource management system, and how we can replace static rules and assumptions with real data-driven behaviours instead.
Yeah, and we actually did a study on that. We wanted to see how we could affect passenger behavior by displaying their gate in different times, and we could actually impact the passenger behavior, and finding a way to utilize that knowledge is something where we want to head.
Yeah, I think completing that loop between capturing the data, what we're about to talk around, of forecasting, and then influencing the passenger behaviour to improve their journeys and also help the airport manage capacity and efficiency is the next step for airports. Let's move on to forecasting, which is the other half of the story for this particular session. For those that don't currently use forecasting tools, can you just give us a little bit of an introduction about how Keflavik's using forecasting and where in the airport you're using forecasting?
Yeah, so of course, after implementing the cryptic gate data, we felt that we had the knowledge and data to build on to be able to do the forecasting solution with Veovo. So what we are doing is we are predicting and using the forecasting to predict passenger numbers in the areas that we do forecast for, the occupancy in the area, and the passenger appearance. And we use it mostly now for capacity planning in our security. So the areas that we do cover at Keflavik are, we do the security areas, both the main security as well as the transfer security. And then we also forecast the immigration and immigration hall. And then we also cover the baggage hall and the duty-free stores.
Okay, and what time horizon do you forecast out to? Are you doing this on the day, or is it for a few days in advance?
So we do live reforecasting, so every 5 minutes. We do that for up to 36 hours ahead, and then we do forecast for each area. It depends on how long far ahead we forecast for, but for example, in security, we do daily forecasting for 60 days ahead. Okay,
wow. And how do you share the forecast with the other teams within the airport? How do the teams and stakeholders within the airport engage with the forecast?
So it's really simple with this solution, because we can just create these individual dashboards for the users and have these sub-organization users. So we can control what data gets shared with what user, and it's all really automated. We don't have to do much manual work to be able to share it there, which is actually one of the, I would say, biggest values of this forecasting solution compared to what we had before, is the ease of sharing the data. So.
Great. And what are the main challenges being addressed by forecasting? What were kind of the key benefits you were looking to achieve, and have you achieved them?
Well, we want to identify if we see capacity issues, of course, beforehand, so that we can ensure a more seamless and enjoyable experience for passengers going through the terminal. And since implementing the solution, because it's always up to date, we always have with the reforecasting, we always have the latest information about show profiles, about passenger appearance, so that we can always adapt our plans and be better prepared for these capacity constrained days. For example, if we take a look at what happened now, I mean, they're not, the volume of passengers is not what we would have expected before the pandemic hit, but now, of course, we just have limited resources, and during Christmas, volume increased quite rapidly because of people just going on holiday and going home, and as well as coming back to Iceland. And the solution actually helped us identify those largest days, so we could plan accordingly, and we could both inform the airlines, all of our airport stakeholders, and we were able actually to manage these days very well.
Great. And why did you roll out passenger flow, curb to gate first and then forecasting? Was that a deliberate choice, or?
Yeah, I would say before you do the forecasting, you definitely need to know the passenger flow in much more detail than without the curb to gate solution. So I would definitely recommend the curb to gate first and build on that data for the forecasting, for it to be more accurate. You need the show profiles in all of the areas. You need the occupancy and all that data that comes from the curb to gate.
Okay, and what about other data sources? I know you mentioned the pandemic hit, I think probably only a couple of months after we'd gone live with forecasting in Keflavik. What other data sources have you found really helpful in sort of improving and driving the quality of the forecast?
Well, if you have, of course, I would definitely say the AODP, just per flight information, and having that as well up to date and live is really important. And then also in all the areas where you do have PAX checks, for example, boarding pass scans, where you can get the actual numbers of passengers going through the area, just to be able to compare it live to the forecast. It kind of builds trust to the system. For example, if you're implementing a new system, it shows you straight away if the system is telling you the actual truth, or if it's and if there are some deviation, you can so easily identify them and then just adjust accordingly. So yeah.
So what have been Keflavik's biggest challenges in introducing forecasting and passenger flow, and were those challenges technical, or were they around the process, or actually was it the culture and human side that also introduced those challenges?
We didn't really have many challenges. Yeah, maybe the human aspect, of course, just getting people to understand how the system works and to get them to trust it. For example, if you're asking people to plan differently or work differently, you'll have to build trust with between them and the system, basically. So but I think with how easily you can see the evaluation through the system, that really wasn't big of a challenge.
And I think what we did also well there is that when you get a deviation from the forecast, or you think you get a deviation from the forecast, let's say if you all of a sudden have a 15 or 20 minute queue in security, and they think it's the system's fault, they've been trying to follow the system tells them how they should staff, how many lanes they should open, is that we've been doing a lot. We basically show them how, we basically show them what went wrong. For example, in security, if you're supposed to open 6 lanes at 5 o'clock in the morning, but you open them at 5:10, that makes a huge difference. And that causes this extra queue. So the system wasn't telling you anything wrong. It's how you operate, but you didn't notice because it's only a 5 or 10 minute difference. but we're constantly showing them how they are doing. So how are they opening lanes compared to the system? And at the same time, we're always comparing what were the actual numbers on the flight, what were the forecasted numbers, so they can realize right away what went wrong. Was it the opening of lanes? Was it just that the forecast was off? And of course, that can happen during situations.
Yeah, but then they know if the show up profile was not correct. You can just see it straight away. All of the analysis is basically can be done by the end user just by looking at the system for a couple of minutes. It's really easy, user friendly. So
and easy to analyze what went wrong.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's fascinating. I mean, the retrospective angle as well, I think, is really important to driving a good forecasting system and understanding, is it people not following it? Is it the system? And if it's the system, what drove that difference? Because I think that continuous improvement process has to wrap around the whole piece. What are your plans for the future for passenger flow and forecasting? Are you at the end of the journey, or do you have plans of how you're going to expand out what you're doing and where you're going?
Well, we definitely feel like with the curb-to-gate data, we have information to be able to forecast in every area of the airport. So that's something that we could look at, as well as just drive more into like AI-powered solutions. And we want to start using the curb-to-flight data more to analyze the passenger behaviors and to be able to see how we can affect certain behaviors, or so we want to be able to build more of a behavioral pattern analysis from the data that we're collecting from the system. Anything you want to add?
Basically, just find the value in the data.
Yeah, exactly.
Or find more value in the data. We're using it a lot, but of course, we're always trying to find more value in the data. Where can we change data into cash?
And of course, I mean, there are a lot of expansions in the near future here at Keflavik. So we plan on using the data in all of our really construction projects coming up.
Brilliant. Okay, and for our airports in the audience today who are only just starting out on this journey, what would be your takeaways for them? Where do you think they should start? And how could they build on their initial steps?
So from my side, from the operational side, I think all airports need to understand their passengers. They need to understand the passenger behaviors. That's why I'm always a big fan of the curb-to-gate solution. And for me, that was a clear starting point. I mean, we started with only security, but we were always planning on bringing in an analysis tool to understand the whole passenger journey throughout the airport. Because we're constantly doing different things. We're changing the retail area, and we want to see how that all affects the passenger behavior, if it's in a good way or it's in a negative way. So I would start there, but it seemed from our side that adding the forecasting module wasn't that complicated, because with the curb-to-gate, you're collecting most of the data you need for it. So, but I would always say
good starting point.
Yeah, a good starting point is to understand the passenger flow and with the curb-to-gate, some kind of a solution. Of course, you can take parts of it. If you only want to do it for security, you might want to start with, you could do a curb-to-security solution, but we always wanted to go for the full solution.
Yeah.
And we're actually, we thought about expanding it even further. So trying to understand not only when the passenger showed up at the terminal, but when did he want to show up at the terminal? So going outside of the terminal and going towards the roads to see, okay, because we might have a parking problem. The passenger wanted to arrive half an hour earlier, but he didn't find parking, or he got somehow confused in all the landside parts of the airport. So we've actually thought about expanding it.
Yeah, and it's definitely something other customers we have are looking at, whether that's expanding out into the road or actually also into the rail and major rail metro links into the airport as well, to start understanding how that impacts the journey, and particularly in the cases where things don't go to plan, how are they part of that contributing factor? I think having that vision of how passengers can also tailor their journeys, how you can start influencing those passengers, like you described with the fidget screens, but influencing them before they even leave home as to what kind of journey do they want, what's the airport going to be like during their journey, and therefore they can adjust how early they arrive or whether they want to take the risk of arriving late and running through the airport. I think is kind of the future of that passenger experience and that passenger journey.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you guys have been really successful with this project. And I did have my final question was really, if you did it again, is there something you'd have done differently with hindsight in implementing these projects?
No, I don't think so. I don't think we would have done it differently, but we would have known. I mean, it is more complicated, as I said before. It's more complicated as the flow isn't streamlined. Passengers going front and back, and there's a lot of work in just defining what does that mean. When does a passenger leave to his gate if he goes 5 times to his gate? So that required more work than we expected. But I mean, that's just something. Well, yeah, we kind of didn't foresee it.
Yeah.
But I don't think I would have done it any different.
No. I think we rolled out the forecasting solution at the exactly right times. And no.
But of course, I mean, we have this during COVID, so it's pretty difficult to analyze if it's correct or not, with maybe sometimes 5 passengers going on a flight. so these are strange times.
But it tests out the system just in a different way. At least now we know it's really adaptable to the current situation, so we can really adjust it to a pandemic time. I mean, that's a test in itself, I guess.
Without a doubt. I mean, I know from our perspective, looking back, we definitely wouldn't have launched a forecasting capability just before a pandemic. But given that we have, just understanding the impact of volatility on a system like that has allowed us to take significant steps forward on the product that we just wouldn't have taken if necessity hadn't driven it. So I'd like to thank you guys for this session. It's been really great to hear about the experience of Keflavik Airport in both the passenger flow and the forecasting. I've really enjoyed the session. I could have carried on asking you questions all day, and I'm sure our airports watching have also enjoyed the session. Thanks very much, guys.